The Battle of Mohi. The early 13th century saw the unprecedented rise of the Mongol Empire under Genghis Khan, whose successors rapidly expanded its borders westward. After the conquest of the Khwarezmian Empire and much of Central Asia, the Mongols turned their attention to Eastern Europe. The campaign into Europe was spearheaded by Subutai, one of the greatest Mongol generals, under the authority of Ogedei Khan, Genghis Khan's third son and successor. The Mongol-European campaign began in earnest in 1236, targeting the Russian principalities. By 1240, the Mongols had captured Kiev, destroying much of its infrastructure and slaughtering large numbers of its population. With the Russia's states effectively neutralized, the Mongols advanced into Poland, Silesia, and Hungary, encountering fragmented and disorganized resistance. On April 11th, 1241, the Mongol army led by Subutai reached the plains of the Sajó River near the village of Mohi in northeastern Hungary. A Christian coalition led by King Bela IV gathered in unison. Combined, they formed a large army, estimated between 25,000 and 30,000 men, including Hungarian nobility, knights, infantry, and their neighboring Christian allies, the Kingdom of Croatia, as well as soldiers from the Knights Templar. The Christian force camped on the western side of the Sajó River, hoping to defend the bridge crossing near Mohi. King Bela had sent a small surveillance force to guard the bridge, whilst his main army camped nearby. At night, Subutai sent a few detachments of his Mongol cavalry to cross the bridge and survey the area. It was at this point a large skirmish broke out. The element of night combined with the heavy Hungarian crossbowmen gave the Mongol cavalry no chance. They were decimated, and the survivors were sent fleeing back to their camp. Thinking that victory was all but secured, the Christian coalition forces withdrew with the bulk of their army back to their main fortified encampment and opted to rest till sunrise. This was to be a fatal flaw for King Bela IV and the Christians. At the crack of dawn the next morning, Subutai ordered his entire force to descend upon the Sajó River. While the relatively small Hungarian force concentrated their defense at the bridge crossing, the Mongols had discovered a shallow water crossing a few kilometers upstream, unseen by Hungarian scouts. Subutai's forces launched a coordinated and devastating attack. They unleashed a devastating barrage of catapult fire, which disrupted and disorganized the Hungarian defenders, while simultaneously causing casualties. This allowed the bulk of the Mongol cavalry to cross the river and position themselves behind the Hungarian defenses. The Mongols launched a full assault on both fronts. Mongol commander Batu Khan attacked across the bridge with siege weapons, while Subutai and his elite troops encircled the Hungarian position from the rear. Trapped between the two Mongol forces, the Hungarian force found itself in a hopeless position. They were soon decimated to the last man, whilst the main force couldn't assemble in time, failing to come to their allies' aid. The Mongol army now took control of the river crossing. This was a huge blow to the Christians, as the river crossing was their best defense against the fast-moving Mongol cavalry contingents. Now, with the crossing forfeited, the Christian army would be forced into a fight with the Mongols on open terrain, which was not an ideal scenario for any Western medieval army at this period. The entirety of the Christian army vacated their fortified camp and formed up to meet the Mongol aggressors at the river crossing. Whilst this battle was about to reach its climax, disastrous news had stricken the land. A second Mongol army had been deployed under the commanders Baidar and Kadan to attack Poland, culminating in the Battle of Legnica on April 9, 1241, where a coalition of Polish, German, and Templar forces had just been defeated. Nevertheless, the Hungarian Christian alliance led by Bela of Hungary still had their own major problem to deal with. Bela took the initiative. His force swiftly closed in on the Mongol army, right as it just finished crossing the river and attempted to form up for battle. The Christian forces had many advantages. Firstly, the Mongols had not been able to deploy properly for battle. They had the numerical advantage. And more importantly, they had the Mongols pinned against the river. With morale in their ranks high, King Bela opted for a full-scale assault, which, given his overwhelming advantages, any competent commander in his position would have done the same. The two armies collided, cavalry smashed into one another. The Mongols fought for their very lives. The superior Christian-Hungarian numbers became rapidly apparent. The Mongols, fighting with their backs against the river, were forced to slowly give ground. Bela's heavy cavalry rapidly began to close in on the Mongol flanks, catching them in a pincer maneuver, slowly strangling their resistance. By this stage, King Bela had committed his whole entire force to the onslaught and did not consider that perhaps the Mongols had kept reserves in place for this exact scenario to unfold, a decision that would inevitably come back to haunt the Christian resistance. Unfortunately for Bela and the Christians, the Mongol commander Subutai was 2 steps ahead. He had held back a portion of his army from the crossing. Seeing the situation, he rapidly led contingents of his elite Mongol heavy cavalry across the shallow openings that were further upstream and across the river. Like a menacing herd of elephants, Subutai's heavy Mongol contingent rapidly rode inward towards the fully exposed Christian flank. They smashed into the vulnerable Hungarian cavalry, causing them to panic and begin to flee. that one masterful maneuver by Subutai, the tide of the entire battle utterly shifted. The Christian resolve broke rapidly. Their men believed that a second reinforcing Mongol army had attacked them from the flank and rear. And in response, the Christian soldiers en masse broke off the engagement and fled back to their fortified encampment. The Christian infantry were not quick enough to outrun the Mongol cavalry. They were all violently cut down or picked off by Mongol mounted archers. However, King Bela of Hungary had managed to successfully escape, as well as most of his Hungarian cavalry, alongside his Christian allied cavalry. Whilst their allied infantry had been getting slaughtered, the Christian cavalry had reached their fortified camp. The abandonment of the infantry slowed down the Mongols, which in turn is what allowed the rest of the army to escape. A cruel but unintentional consequence. However, for King Bela and the Christian cavalry, their problems were about to intensify as the Mongols caught up with them and had now fully surrounded their camp. They had brought along their mangonel catapults to begin besieging the Christian camp. The Hungarian and Christian cavalry attempted to sally out and attack the Mongol encirclement, but each time they were beaten back. The swift Mongol mounted archers were too fast. They dealt a devastating barrage of arrows each time the heavy Christian cavalry attempted to engage with them. The reality of the situation came to light. King Bela and the Christians now realized that they had not only allowed an assured victory to fall from their grasp, but now they were merely fighting for their very survival. A sheer stroke of luck appeared, or so it seemed when the Mongols parted, opening up their formation and allowed a large gap to form. This was, however, a masterful plan by Subutai. He knew that fighting a cornered enemy would be dangerous, and his army would take losses in the process. So as a counter-strategy, he opted to let the Christians flee the camp. Then, when they began to believe they could escape, he ordered his mounted Mongol archers to fire barrages of arrows into their ranks, picking them off en masse as they rode off with their backs turned in a panic and utterly defenseless. This was a genius move by Subutai, as his plan worked excellently. King Bela narrowly escaped the battlefield, fleeing first to Austria and later to Dalmatia. The Battle of Mohi was a catastrophic defeat for Hungary and their Christian allies. Estimates suggest that tens of thousands of Hungarian Christian soldiers and civilians perished. The Mongols ravaged Hungary for the remainder of the year, burning towns, destroying infrastructure, and killing civilians. The death was so bad that the plains of Hungary were nearly depopulated in some areas. In early 1242, however, the Mongol forces suddenly withdrew from Hungary. The reasons for this are debated, but the most accepted explanation is that Ogedei Khan died in December 1241. Batu, who had ambitions to succeed Ogedei, retreated to the east to secure his claim, ending the campaign in Europe.